Donald Trump has just issued an ultimatum to NATO, a tough message with demands that could reshape the entire war in Ukraine and even the relationship between the United States and Europe. But the question that everyone can't stop thinking about is this: is he right to make sanctions against Russia conditional on these new demands? Today you will understand in detail what is behind this explosive move. Because this is not a vague statement, Trump was direct. Either Europe completely stops buying oil and gas from Russia and imposes tariffs against China, or the United States will not shoulder the heaviest sanctions against Moscow alone. An ultimatum that reveals impatience, pressure, and a clear message: Washington will no longer act alone. Do you think Trump is exaggerating or being realistic? Let's get to the main point. In a post on his own social network, Trump harshly criticized the European allies, calling it shocking that they still import Russian energy even after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Europe still buys gas from Russia. He said he is ready to impose new sanctions against Moscow, but only if NATO moves forward together. It's not enough for just a few countries. Everyone needs to completely cut off Russian oil and gas. And furthermore, he wants Europe to adopt tariffs of up to 100 against Chinese imports as a way to indirectly target Xi Jinping's support for Putin. This dual condition, cutting off Russian energy and taxing China, was seen by analysts as an ultimatum. It's a way to make it clear that the United States will no longer bear the costs of the war alone. But does this make sense from a military and economic point of view? Absolutely. Because oil and gas are the main source of funding for Putin's war machine. Estimates indicate that energy exports inject billions every year into the Russian military budget. And the truth is that, despite being a nuclear power, Russia is economically fragile. Its economy is smaller than Italy's and less diversified than Brazil's, with very few relevant products besides oil, gas, and fertilizers. It's a military giant, but an economic dwarf dependent on energy. That's why Trump insists. Each shipment of liquefied natural gas bought by Europeans is, in practice, ammunition delivered to the Russian army. Do you agree that buying Russian energy is like arming the enemy? Write your opinion in the comments below. It's true that Europe has reduced direct purchases of Russian energy by more than 90% since February 2022. The pipelines like Nord Stream were cut off, and so were maritime imports. But huge loopholes remain. Countries like Hungary, Slovakia, and Austria continue to receive gas through land pipelines, claiming energy security. France, even though it's the vocal leader in defending Ukraine, still imports large volumes of Russian liquefied natural gas. And more. The European Union allows the purchase of diesel and Russian petroleum products through France, being a vocal leader in Ukraine's defense, that is, the fuel arrives, only the label changes. And Trump did not forgive this hypocrisy. He pointed out that while Europe arms Ukraine with one hand, with the other it finances Putin. But why does this contradiction persist? Because Europe faces a cruel dilemma. It diversified its supplier base somewhat, buying liquefied gas from the United States, Norway, and Qatar. But a complete transition requires new infrastructure, terminals, and distribution networks, investments that cost billions and take years to be ready. And now, in 2025, with winter approaching, European governments fear blackouts and industrial collapses. Cutting everything off at once could bring down entire economies and spark mass protests, which is already happening in several European countries. For Trump, this sounds like an excuse. For European leaders, it's political survival. Would you cut it off immediately, even with the risk of blackouts? Comment here, yes or no. But we know that the war started in 2022. It's already 2025 at the time of our recording, and nothing has been done. Now here's where the most revealing number comes in. In 2024, the European Union spent about 22 billion euros on Russian gas and oil. In the same period, direct military support to Kiev was only 21 billion. In other words, Europe sent more money to Moscow for energy than to the Ukrainians for weapons. In total, adding financial and humanitarian aid, it was 130 billion for Ukraine since 2022. But the 22 billion for Russia? It means tanks, missiles, and ammunition paid for by the Europeans themselves. Trump calls this hypocrisy, and he's not alone in that assessment. So, the final question is inevitable. Is Trump right to condition new American sanctions on these demands? From a strategic point of view, yes. If Europe completely stops buying Russian energy, Moscow will lose more than 30% of its revenue, undermining the war. And with tariffs against China, the impact would be twofold, since Beijing now buys much more Russian oil and gas than Europe itself. In addition to providing critical military components to Moscow, in Trump's view, as long as this isn't done, Europeans will continue living with that contradiction. They help Kyiv with one hand and finance the war against Ukraine with the other. Trump's ultimatum exposes the most sensitive wound of the war, European hypocrisy regarding energy. Either Europe finally cuts this umbilical cord with Moscow, or it will continue strengthening the enemy it claims to fight. And I ask you, will Europe finally break away from Russian oil and gas, or will it keep paying to keep the war alive? Leave your opinion here in the comments. I will read them personally. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like. You can also share this video with your friends on social media. Because this discussion isn't just about sanctions, it's about the future of security in the West. I'm Simon Oliveira, and I'll see you in the next video. See you next time.
Has ever done on the border like I've done. Mr. President, what will you tell President Zelensky if you meet with him in New York? Well, he's going to have to get going and make a deal. He's going to have to make a deal. Zelensky's going to have to make a deal. And Europe has to stop buying oil from Russia. Okay? No, they don't, but they have to stop buying oil from Russia. Mr. President, there are some...